And we are back with another episode of the Opinionated thoughtbotter. My name is Svenja. I'm a developer and team lead here at thoughtbot. And with me on screen today is Rob. Rob, before we discuss your opinion, which we will do at the Opinionated thoughtbotter, can you say a few words about yourself?
I'm Rob Whittaker. I'm the Director of Software Development for Fusion at thoughtbot. Fusion is our consulting team across Europe, the Middle East and Africa. I've been at thoughtbot for almost 9 years, originally working in their London studio. And then when we started working from anywhere, I moved back home to the north of England, so I live in Cheshire, just south of Manchester, in a village that's famous for where Harry Styles grew up.
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's in the summer, there's just Harry Styles fans everywhere, clogging up the streets. Yeah.
Okay. Very happy to have you here. So let's just jump in because this takes about 30 minutes, and we want to hear what your opinion, maybe hot take is. So can you say your opinion in maybe one sentence?
I sure can. My opinion is that extreme programming is the one true software methodology.
Okay. Now you
Easy.
said it's a method. Very easy. Not easy for me because you said extreme programming, and I don't know, when I heard extreme programming, I'm not sure if you know it. You probably know it, but there's the meme or GIF of the cat typing on the keyboard very widely. I guess that's not what you meant because you mentioned it's a methodology. Could you please enlighten me on what you're referring to?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a designer at thoughtbot earlier, and we were talking about iterative development, and I was saying it's interesting that in the extreme programming books, programming isn't actually mentioned that much. It's more of a way of delivering a product. And so it was a methodology that was written in the late 1900s, early third millennium, so 1999, 2000, by a guy called Kent Beck. And it was a reaction to the world of waterfall. And it's an agile methodology. I don't know if it's written before they signed the Agile Manifesto, but Kent Beck is one of the original signatories of the Agile Manifesto. And it's a set of principles and practices for delivering software in iterations, or not necessarily software, any sort of product. So that's why it was an interesting conversation to have with a designer this morning to talk about. It's all about how do we deliver something to deliver value a lot along the way.
Maybe a better, and I know naming is hard, name would be extreme consulting?
Yeah, I think more recently, so Kent Beck in the last year or so has kind of started reframing it in terms of, what's he call it, the forest and the desert, I think. And so the desert is this place where there's
that.
Yes. Yeah. So the desert is like a place where there's minimal trust, and there's it's hard to make changes and things like that, whereas the forest is more plentiful and you have this iterative way of working. So I don't know if it was just a reaction to what was going on at the time. So let me check. I've got the book in front of me. So let me just see when this was first published.
Nice.
Yeah, so 1999. So the world of 1999 is a lot different to the world of 2025. We have people at thoughtbot who weren't even born when this book was written. So a lot's changed, but at that time, I guess there was a lot of software that was still on CDs or floppy disks, and we're probably just going through the first web bubble and things like that. But I think I'm starting to see people talk about it more and more again, and it has stood the test of time. And I think there's been certain the word agile suddenly got a big A over the last quarter of a century, and this is less. It's less, not less stringent, but it's more about the practices than the naming of it than anything else.
Okay, Can we speak about one area of practice, like of the methodology?
Yeah, let me see if I can find this. There's a really good diagram in here, which I use a lot when I'm talking to folks about this. And you don't even have
Mm-hmm.
to use it in the context of extreme programming. So we're a consultancy. And so, like, we're often working with different people, whether it's different clients, different company types, and things like that. But I realized recently that there are certain practices that, if these practices start to go away, then all of a sudden the project starts to become unsuccessful. So let me see if I can show you this. So this is a diagram, and these are like all the different practices. So you've got, this is where I see if I can read backwards.
I
On-site
can read.
customer,
Okay.
planning game, metaphor, 40-hour week, refactoring, simple design, testing, short releases, pair programming, coding standards, collective ownership, and continuous integration. And like you can see, this is like a little like web, or like I think of it as a safety net. And as soon as you take one of these points away, you start to get holes in the net. And so like you can often point to like these practices on a project and go, oh, this is where maybe we need to add some pair programming, or maybe we need to add in an on-site customer, or maybe we're working too hard, not too hard, but like we're working 80-hour weeks where that's not sustainable. And so those practices are good headlines for a successful project.
I like that. If you could pick one, or maybe they are all relevant, but is there one that stands out to you where people might have the most issues with?
The most issues with,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's
um,
maybe like mostly difficult, maybe? Don't know.
so a big part of extreme programming is collaboration and communication. And so I think that would be where folks have the biggest issues or the biggest challenges with, is kind of having that, not necessarily constant, not like all day conversation, but having the right people in the right room to be able to ask questions of or get decisions from. I think that can be a big thing, depending on if you're working for a consultancy, like ensuring that you have the client as part of the team. So you're working with the client, not for the client. Or even if you're a product company, is the product manager available to you? Is the product manager the person who's the one who's going to be making the decision? Do you have access to a customer, which sometimes the product manager is a proxy for? That's kind of, I think, a big thing. I think that's kind of a big one. Depending, we work a lot with Ruby and Rails, so I think the testing is less of an issue because it's kind of built into the culture more. But like if you looked at that diagram, most arrows point to testing there, so it seems like very core to everything in there. Whether that's before or after you've written your code, but testing, um,
And it
like
also depends on what kind of testing, right? Because you can also have behavior-driven testing, and yeah. So how to
yeah,
involve the client as well, like in a QA.
yeah, and that kind of takes into my next point, because it's testing not necessarily the code, but like your hypothesis of what's going to be successful. And so it's all about working in small iterations. So uh, one of the things, that book I had it before, is like, it's called Extreme Programming Explained, which is like the core book. But then there's like a whole series of books that go with it. And so one of them is Planning Extreme Programming, which goes more into the depth of like how you plan a release, how you plan an iteration, and things like that. But one of the first steps they talk about is getting a skeleton flow in place. So that's like, what is the core feature of the product? What is the core thing that we're trying to build here? And you just build something that's like, doesn't really do anything, but shows like the idea, so that you can kind of test your hypothesis. So it might be that a trivial example might be that you have a login screen, but it doesn't matter what you put in on that login screen. You press submit and it takes you to, you are signed in. Now, that hasn't hit a database. It hasn't checked whether you're valid or not, but it shows the flow to a customer. And the customer doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who pays money. It might be somebody who works on your team, or it might be whoever. But you've now got that you can now iterate on. And so you can now make a decision about, okay, we don't want to use email. We want to use a text number, a phone number, or you can decide about various different things. It's a convoluted example, but you can stretch that out there. And so building that up in iterations, and making, what is the smallest change we can make to make progress on that. And if you read the book, like they're shipping throughout the day, which is something that we kind of take for granted nowadays, like with continuous integration and continuous delivery, that you're constantly adding on to that. But I bet people could ship a lot more often, smaller changes, rather than every day, like continuously throughout the day. Like I'm gonna have like it's just HTML, but it does what I want. And then the next change maybe I'm gonna add some styling to it, or I'm gonna do whatever to it and just kind of build up slowly. Yeah, and that's kind of the cool
Yeah.
thing to it.
I mean, for that, we also do have feature flags and all that. It's all a matter of how you implement it, right? So I do understand, like, some clients might be a bit hesitant to, I don't want to ship it because I don't want the client, like the users to see it. But for that, we would have feature flags and all that. I do like the simple, or the smallest iteration steps, because, well, you can show what you're working on, and this might be sometimes more tricky when you are heavily working on the back end and you don't have so much visible things, but just like to show the things that you're working on, and communicating them. I do think it's important.
Yeah, I think that's that kind of idea, and tell me if I've kind of misheard, is like the idea of like I'm working on the back end, so there's not necessarily visible changes. I think is kind of a big part of maybe not extreme programming, but iterative development in kind of showing the value that you're adding. And so, for example, I was working on a previous project on a feature where we had to add some reporting. And so we were starting to break down this idea of a report. And the person said, oh, well, we need to add a database table that's got all these things. That should be our first step to set up the schema. And I was like, but how do you know what columns you need? Like, how do you derive that? And he goes, oh, well, they might need this and they might need that. And it's like, well, they might not need that. And so instead, my argument would be to build it from the top down. So you build a UI, so like you have like a report that's the same report every time, and it just shows you like, and then you go, oh, where are we getting the date from, the publish date? Oh, it comes from over here. Okay, so we need to store that. Let's make that a bit more dynamic. And just like you can go from having like something static that everybody can kind of look at and get aligned on, and then add the little bits on. And so like you're adding like these vertical slices, and knowing that you're adding enough, it kind of ties into. There's a lovely little analogy that somebody told me about a bridge.
Oh,
So
yes,
they were talking
please.
about. So sometimes we get asked about estimates as developers, or as consultants, about how long is this going to take. And somebody said to me, it's not necessarily about how long it will take to build the bridge, but what type of bridge you can build in the time. So say you were stood at the edge of a riverbank and you want to get to the other side, that's your problem. Okay, we'll drop a plank down. Okay, now we can get from one side of that might be enough. And then what we found is like a week later, people go and walking across this plank and falling in. Okay, let's put some guardrails up so that they're less likely to fall in. Or it might be that, oh, we're trying to get cars across it. Okay, so there's a number of ways we can solve this. Do we put two thin planks down that are car width apart? Do we put a wide plank? Do we need a thicker plank? And so you're now working in iterations about that, but you might get to a point where, okay, one plank getting across is enough. We're shipped. And that's all about how do you make sure you're delivering value all the time and doing just enough to deliver that value over and over again. There's a secret part to this, which I think is interesting, in that you should ask why you want to cross the river, which is a different topic. Yeah.
Yeah, but not less important. But I think
Yeah.
what is important, or what's a core element of this methodology, yay, and I said it,
Nice.
is the you continuously communicate, you continuously ship, you continuously build. I know that nowadays, or to me, it feels like everything must get faster and faster and faster, and you try to cut things short at maybe the wrong area. For example, communicating, right? Asynchronous, like we communicate asynchronously mostly, I would say. How would you? What do you think is very important to let the client, for example, know? Like this is the current state. When you say we want to ship very often during the day, how do you keep the client informed? Maybe they sit on the other side of the world and there's this time zone shifting and all that. Like, how do you ensure?
I think a key part of this is, I think it's called radiating information. It's just kind of putting the thing out there to say, like, it comes down to planning to some extent, where planning isn't like a one at the beginning of a project and done. Like, planning is a continuous thing throughout the project. And so it's about, planning is as much about understanding what you can do, but also like aligning expectations. And so if you're working asynchronously, I think you'd still have that conversation about this thing's come up or this thing's happened, so that the end thing has changed. So that I kind of think about it as in, imagine you're going to meet your friend for, you're going out for dinner and drinks in the evening, and you live an hour away, and you're driving to meet your friend, and 15 minutes into your journey, you hit traffic. And you know you're going to be in traffic for half an hour. So you ring them up to say, look, I'm going to be half an hour late, so maybe that changes our plans, and then you tell them, and then like, actually 10 minutes later, the traffic cleared faster. So you ring them up and say, oh, actually, I'm going to be sooner. Or you're stuck in traffic that long that you decide, I'm going to stop and just have something to eat because I'm starving. I need to have something to eat. And then they ring your friend and say, like, I've had something to eat. You grab something. And so I just realized I was doing Millennium Phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
And
ring
are
your
you
friend.
driving at the same time? Sorry.
No, hands free. So, so yeah, you just ring your friend and say, I've had something to eat, so let's just go for drinks now. Like, there's no need for us to, but you change your plans depending on the circumstances. And you do that just in every day. And you do that if you're working on a project, and if your friend isn't available on the phone, you could maybe pull over to the side safely and text them to let them know. But the key thing is to be communicating in a way that you are both happy with. We work with so many different types of clients that it might be, I think we tend to aim for Slack, but some people have Teams as their preference. Some people have email as their preference. Some people have something else as their preference of communication. Some people like to talk on the cards for closer context. Some people like to talk in the GitHub thing, but the most important thing is to have that alignment of how are we going to communicate, and setting expectations, I think, is the key thing there.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would meet again with you if we would meet for dinner and then you say, oh, yeah, sorry, I just ate something.
Yeah.
I'm not
Oh,
sure
wow.
that would be really successful. I think you
Yeah.
need.
But we still go out for drinks. You still get the pleasure of my company for at least like five,
Oh,
10
yeah.
minutes.
Then we have to say, well, then in that case, we would need to ask the question, why? Why do we
Yeah.
meet? Do we meet for dinner or drinks? So,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
the why question is really important. Okay, different question. Let's imagine you would not be my development director.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just a developer at, not a consulting agency, but like at a product company, for example. What could I do right now or maybe tomorrow to improve the way I work in regards to extreme programming?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to not say it depends. I think what I would do is I would try and grab a hold of that diagram that I showed before and kind of look at what's missing for me there, and maybe look at like the number. If there's like, there's 5 things here, like which of the ones has got the most arrows to it that's missing for me, and maybe that's the highest priority. Because it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. Is it that we're introducing a lot of bugs, and like the features keep coming back as unsuccessful, or so that might be, we might need to introduce testing. We need more tests. We might need to change it to maybe test-driven development. Is it that changes are taking a long time? Like we're trudging through this a lot to make changes. So that might mean you need to create more time for refactoring. Is it that you're taking, like, it's not that it's taking a long time to make the changes, but it's taking a long time to ship because like the expectation of what you ship, it may be too big. You're like, might be designing too big of a feature. Your expectations are you can only put it into production if it looks like this. So maybe you need to break it down into smaller pieces, or you need to simplify your design. It could be that a ticket or a story or a card's been sat there for a week because Angela's been on holiday. So then you need to introduce the idea of collective ownership, where anybody can move that, where anybody can write the code and things like that. It might be that you're waiting on a decision from the product manager because they're busy in meetings or they're just not available. So like you need somebody who's on site, the on-site customer. And so like there's all these different things depending on what's the problem you're trying to solve. But all those things I've said is likely something that somebody watching this has heard that problem and gone like, and just gone, oh, that's just the way it is. But like, I believe that extreme programming has the label for you to say, oh, we're not doing collective ownership. How can we introduce that? And by having all the labels in place, you'll be driving yourself towards success on the project.
I really like that. So we definitely gonna link to the books below, like below the video.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Is there anything I missed? Is there? We talked about. I mean, for me, I really like to do pair programming. Collaborating is, for me, it's really important because, especially nowadays where you work remotely, it's easy to feel isolated or alone. But how can you increase the importance of pair programming, for example, to your engineering manager, if you have someone, if it's not, for example, if it's not usual to do in your company? We at thoughtbot, we do pair programming a lot, and yeah.
It's there's a number of ways you can sell it. I think one of the main things is like the idea of collective ownership is one way. So we talk about the lottery number. So say you're working with there's a part of the code that only Brian knows how to work on, and so Brian's the only person who ever works on that. But what if Brian wins the lottery tonight and decides he doesn't want to come in tomorrow? Then all of a sudden we're in a mad scramble where nobody knows how that code works. And so pair programming is an ideal, and I would say probably the best way to disseminate information about your code base and your product. People can argue about documentation, but how long have we been doing this?
I wanted to bring that up. No, I did wanted to say, well written documentation would help as well.
Yeah, so I was going to say with like how old am I now? My 19 years of professional experience, I am yet to see documentation, as well written as it may be kept up to date. Because the person who was motivated to write the documentation leaves the team, and everybody else is just like, and there's so many times you go on a project and somebody says, oh yeah, that's not our date, you don't do it that way, you do it this way. My argument would be to kind of how much of that can you automate? How much of that can you turn into a script? How much of that can you turn into a conversation or things like that? Because yeah, there's always a way to improve it. Just because it's always been that way for me, just because I've always seen it that way, doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. But in my experience, I'm yet to see a code base where people keep that documentation up to date.
I agree, but I think that's wrong. But it's wrong.
That's fine. So my challenge to you would be, how do you think so we'll turn it around then. Do you think the attitude's wrong, or do you think my attitude about it is wrong, or do you think is my perception of it wrong, or is the idea that we can't do it wrong? What is wrong? Let me ask that question. What do you think is wrong?
What do you mean, Svenja? I agree that documentation are heavily outdated throughout every project I think I've seen. And I think that is wrong. To keep it outdated, to make it happen, that it's getting outdated. I sometimes I really like rules. Some areas. I would enforce it. Like, is the documentation still updated? Still up to date? As a CI step, for example, I mean, it can become very annoying, but something that becomes very annoying usually gets followed. And then after a while, you don't need it when it becomes a habit.
So this falls nicely under something that I think would be a really good use of an LLM. I'm a big fan of trying to find those chores, like that 80% of your work that just takes up your time, that takes you away from that 20% of like, this is my core talent and this is where my artistry or creativity comes from. And so this might be recency bias. Last night it was at the Northwest Ruby user group that I co-organize in Manchester. And a guy called Rahul was doing an update on how he's been doing using LLMs. And part of that was he's got using Claude, he's created a command that does a code review. But part of the code review, it checks if the documentation's up to date, and then will update the documentation based on those changes. Now, I'm not saying you should just ship whatever it puts in there, but that kind of takes that barrier to entry away, where you go, okay, I've got a starting point now. I can look at that and go, is that correct in the way? And the reason, my opinion would be that, my second opinion today, my opinion would be that the reason that documentation doesn't get updated is because people see it as a chore and they don't see the value in it. And if you can lower the barrier to entry, or kind of take a little stress point away from that chore, then maybe that would allow it to be kept more up to date. Would be my argument off the top of my head for that. That might be a solution to that problem.
Yeah, I would heavily agree. Unfortunately, we don't have time to speak about that in length. I think just like using LLMs to get rid of chores is not ideal, because then we're just going to use LLMs for everything, because eventually everything becomes a chore. When we start using LLMs, now this goes into a very different direction. But if we are now using LLMs to check and write the documentation, and we are at the point where people use LLMs to write the code, well, then I just like gonna use LLMs to work. I'm just like staying bad. For what? Why?
Well, like it's
extreme, but we are in extreme programming, so
where we are now with LLMs, that it still needs that human in the loop to kind of go, is that going to write? My name's going to be against that text there. Am I happy that my name's going to be against that text? Am I happy that my name's going to be against that line of code, so that when Claire comes along next time and looks at my code, they ask me in 6 months' time, oh, what does this bit mean? I can go, oh yeah, I know what's going on there. Not like, oh, I don't know, I just threw Claude at it. And like, we should take pride in the fact that when you do a git blame, or as I like to alias it, git praise, you like you're happy that your name's alongside that line, because it reflects a decision that you made in the past. And I can still think that's there. And I think it's all about, so I'm lucky enough that I came into doing programming as a hobby, and now I get to do my hobby for a living, and I want to continue that feeling about it. And so if I can get rid of the stuff that maybe makes my job feel less like a hobby, so that I can do the hobby part and my craft, then that's what I'd be aiming to do. Where if I look at documentation, I'm like, okay, that's something that maybe isn't allowing me to do what I love about this. Like a simple example that isn't necessarily AI, but an example of automation, which is probably more what I'm talking about, is Dependabot. Like Dependabot has made such a huge leap for keeping things up to date. I know a lot of people don't like it because it's constantly doing it, but before it'd be like, that'd be somebody trudging through bundle update all the time. And whereas now it's made it a little bit easier. And so that's what I'm kind of seeing as what makes it a little bit easier. What makes the next thing a little bit easier than that? Yeah, I think that's kind of the way I kind of look at it. It's all about how do I automate it more than anything else.
How to use LLMs, yeah. That's actually was the first thing I wanted to say. You don't need LLMs for it. You could just create a step in the CIA process to just ask, did you update the documentation? We are at time, Rob. I'm sorry. I told you I have to cut you short here.
Yep.
I'm so happy that we talked about it. It was super interesting. Did I miss anything? Do you want to please not 10 minutes, but is there anything that you want to say before we
I think
close down?
you kind of half asked me a question before that I didn't get a chance to answer, and that is, and I think I forgot what the actual question is, but the answer is, I think the key thing about using extreme programming or any methodology is we're here to ship working software. That's the goal. That's the why. And in my opinion, extreme programming sets you up the best way to ship working software. To be honest, I couldn't give a monkeys about what methodology you actually use if it keeps you happy and it keeps you shipping working software. And that's why it's my opinion. But it's why it's my opinion that this is the best way, because that's what keeps me happy and keeps me shipping working software.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was fabulous. Fabulous
Thank you for
last
having me.
words. No, thanks for joining. Thank you, everyone. And see you in the next episode of the Opinionated Thoughtbotter. Bye.
See you next time.